Nature hides her secrets in plain sight, waiting only for the eyes that can see. Hermes Trismegistus. What if the plant you were told makes people lazy was once the key priests used to touch the divine? Cannabis wasn't a drug, it was a ritual, a code written into your body, hidden in your memory. Banned not because it weakens, but because it awakens. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you'll see why the green messenger of Thoth was feared by kings, buried by empires, and remembered only by the few who were ready to hold it. Most people think of cannabis and instantly picture stereotypes, laziness, smoke-filled rooms, or mindless giggles. But imagine this instead, a circle of initiates under the stars, silence humming like a drum, a plant burning as a bridge between human and divine. That's how it began, not as an escape, but as a revelation. If that's true, doesn't it make you wonder how far we've drifted from its essence? The ancients didn't see cannabis as a drug. To them, it was a living messenger, a spark carried in green form. Thoth himself recognized it as a key that unlocked remembrance, a tool for vision rather than sedation. The tragedy is that culture reduced it to mockery and fear, stripping away its sacred clothing. But what if those old rituals still whisper beneath the noise of modern stigma? Think about it. Every sacred tool gets distorted when society fears its power. Fire once terrified villagers, yet it became the foundation of civilization. Water once symbolized chaos, yet it became baptism and renewal. Cannabis followed the same path, demonized not for what it is, but for what it awakens. If that's the case, who really benefits from the distortion? I remember talking with someone who used cannabis in silence for the first time, not at a party, not with distractions, just breath and stillness. They said the night sky felt alive, like stars were speaking in a forgotten language. That's a glimpse of the original context, not intoxication, but communication. Could it be that we've been taught to ignore the very portal hidden in plain sight? Stay with me here, because the next piece is even more startling. Science itself now confirms something the ancients already seemed to know. The human body is filled with receptors tuned specifically to this plant, as if designed for dialogue. Isn't it strange that modern biology is finally catching up to what ancient temples already practiced? So before rushing to dismiss cannabis as a symbol of weakness, consider this. What if it was always meant as a mirror, showing humanity what lies beyond illusion? We'll go deeper into that in a moment, but first, let's explore how your very body was built to respond to this plant in ways almost no one talks about. Modern science finally stumbled on what mystics always hinted at: your brain and nervous system are wired with cannabinoid receptors. They're not random mutations, but locks crafted with exquisite precision, waiting for a very specific key. And when cannabis enters the body, it's not an invasion, it's a reunion. Doesn't that make you wonder if nature itself intended this connection? Think of it like a forgotten password. For years, people tried every combination, but the code was always right there, encoded in the body. When the plant interacts with those receptors, new doors open, not artificial, but natural. Suddenly, thoughts spiral into clarity, sensations expand into detail, and silence becomes music. How could something so precise be accidental? The ancients described these states without microscopes or brain scans. The Corpus Hermeticum spoke of illumination that dissolves the veil of matter, echoing almost word for word what people report today. A sense of floating between worlds, memory flooding back like light breaking through a cave. Could it be that our very biology is the missing manuscript science is just now reading? Try this simple experiment. Close your eyes for 10 seconds and breathe deeply into your chest. Imagine those receptors lighting up like tiny lanterns across your nervous system. Even without cannabis, your body responds to intention, to breath, to focus. That's why ancient traditions paired the plant with ritual. Doesn't this hint that the body is designed as a living temple? Of course, you won't hear this perspective in most classrooms. Instead, cannabis is reduced to laziness or crime, while its design is left unspoken. But when you learn that your brain has an endocannabinoid system literally built to communicate with this plant, the story shifts. If your body carries the lock, why not at least ask why the key was created? And here's where it gets fascinating. Cultures across the world already answered that question. From India to Egypt, from the temples of Israel to the chants of Tibet, cannabis was written into their sacred codes. Why did they all converge on the same conclusion? That's exactly where we're headed next. In the Indian Vedas, cannabis was called Vijaya, the conqueror of suffering. It wasn't just poetry, it was prescription. Yogis and seekers used it to step out of the grip of the mind, to quiet the endless chatter, and to experience consciousness as pure presence. Imagine using it not to escape life, but to meet it without filters. Isn't that a completely different story from what you've been told? Egypt held its own secrets. Priests of Thoth burned cannabis with blue lotus and myrrh, a fragrant trinity that turned temples into living portals. The smoke wasn't distraction, it was the incense of revelation. People entered, and suddenly the walls seemed to breathe with symbols. Can you picture how different our world would feel if modern rituals carried that same sacred reverence? Even the Bible carries whispers of the plant. Scholars point to cannabis in Exodus, translated loosely for centuries, but evidence suggests it was cannabis infused into the anointing oil. That means kings and prophets may have been consecrated under its influence, drenched in a sacred compound that tuned them into divine frequency. Doesn't that reframe entire passages of Scripture? Across cultures, you find the same thread. Cannabis was a sacrament, not a stereotype. It was never metaphorical, it was real, physical, alive. When people entered altered states, they weren't hallucinating, they were decoding. The plant wasn't entertainment, it was access. And if so many cultures arrived at the same conclusion independently, isn't that proof it carried a universal resonance? You might wonder, why did civilizations so far apart reach the same insight? It's like discovering mirrors placed across the globe, each reflecting the same truth from a different angle. India, Egypt, Israel, they weren't copying one another, they were remembering something embedded in the fabric of existence. Doesn't that suggest the plant itself holds memory older than culture? But here's the twist, if cannabis was truly sacred, why do so many today claim it only confuses, clouds, or distorts? Could it be that the plant itself never changed, only the way we approach it? To answer that, we need to look at how it reveals what's already hidden inside us. Cannabis doesn't give visions, it removes the static, the fog, the noise, so you can finally see what's already there. It's like cleaning a dusty mirror, the reflection was always present, just waiting to shine through. The ancients knew this, and Hermetic wisdom called it the law of correspondence, as within, so without. But if the plant only reflects you, what happens when you look into it without awareness? Used with reverence, cannabis becomes a lantern revealing the corners of your inner house. Memories, symbols, patterns you've ignored, they suddenly surface like ink rising on parchment. Some find clarity, others find chaos, yet both are mirrors of their state. Isn't it curious that the same plant can be a teacher for one and a trickster for another? Picture this, someone sits with cannabis after days of fasting and silence. The visions come not as hallucinations, but as recognition, threads of truth stitched across their life suddenly glow. Another person lights up after a day of stress, junk food, and noise, and the experience spirals into confusion. Same key, but very different locks. Doesn't that prove the plant isn't the danger, it's how we approach it? Think of music. When a violin is tuned, every note can open hearts. But if the strings are loose, the sound grates and scrapes. Cannabis works like that. It amplifies the tuning of your inner instrument. That's why traditions prepared with intention, cleansing, and prayer. Doesn't that hint that the ritual around the plant matters more than the plant itself? So the danger is not in the green messenger, but in careless use that warps its role. Unconscious hands turn clarity into fog, remembrance into escape. Conscious hands, however, turn smoke into scripture. If that's true, then every breath with the plant becomes sacred or profane. Which way would you choose if you realized it was never neutral? And here's the hidden link the Egyptians treasured: cannabis alone wasn't the full ritual. The missing element was breath, the thread that binds body and spirit, the spark that turns smoke into revelation. Curious how the simple act of breathing might unlock what sages once called the breath of Thoth? For the Egyptians, cannabis wasn't just about smoke, it was about the breath that carried it. They believed every inhale was a thread weaving body and spirit into one fabric. Thoth taught that the key wasn't the plant alone, but the way breath aligned the seeker with higher realms. Doesn't it make sense that the simplest act of living, breathing, was also the doorway to awakening? The ritual of the 7 breaths was more than superstition. Each cycle corresponded to heavens, chakras, and stages of alchemy, like steps up a spiral staircase. With every breath, the body loosened, the mind softened, and symbols began to rise. Imagine using your own lungs as sacred instruments, tuned not for survival, but for vision. Could that be why breath has always been central in mystical practice? Let's try it right now. Take a slow inhale through your nose for 4 counts, hold gently for 3, then release for 7. Feel how the body shifts, calm, open, spacious. Even in 10 seconds, you can sense a window clearing inside you. If one conscious breath changes your state, what happens when you pair that with the plant's messenger? Egyptian priests believed the smoke was secondary, and the breath was the real current. The plant gave potential, but breath was the spark. It's like having a lamp without a flame, you need both for illumination. Doesn't that explain why modern users often miss the depth? They inhale the smoke but forget the breath, chasing the shadow instead of the light. This is why Thoth insisted that seekers master breath before touching sacred plants. Breath was the proof of readiness, the measure of discipline, the anchor when visions arrived. Without it, the plant could scatter the mind like leaves in the wind. But with it, the same plant could focus perception like a laser. Isn't it striking how control of breath transforms the entire journey? And here's where the mystery deepens. When breath and plant unite, symbols begin to stir, images older than language itself. The eye of Horus, the eternal third eye, awakens as if memory itself were returning. Want to see how cannabis becomes not just smoke, but a mirror of the unconscious? When breath, silence, and intention merge with cannabis, something profound happens. It's not about hallucination, it's about recognition. The eye of Horus, the ancient symbol tied to the third eye, begins to awaken. It's as if a hidden lens turns on, allowing you to see through the surface of reality. Haven't you ever felt that sense of seeing more than meets the eye? The Egyptians treated the eye of Horus as more than decoration. It represented mathematics, healing, and perception beyond ordinary sight. When activated, it was said to restore wholeness, like piecing together fragments of a broken mirror. Under cannabis, paired with breath, seekers reported visions not of fantasy, but of eternal symbols rising from within. Doesn't that sound like memory resurfacing, rather than invention? Think of how dreams often bring strange images that feel oddly familiar. The eye works the same way. It doesn't create, it reveals. A serpent winding upward, a spiral of stars, a mirror of fire, These are archetypes woven into the soul's library. The plant doesn't plant them in you, it clears the fog so you can notice them. Doesn't that reframe vision as remembrance? One person told me they once meditated with cannabis and saw a vast blue flame hovering over their chest. At first, they thought it was imagination. But later they learned it matched the Egyptian symbol of the heart as a vessel of divine fire. These moments aren't coincidences, they're activations of symbols buried in collective memory. How many of those symbols still wait for you to see them? This is why traditions always warned, don't chase visions, let visions chase you. The Eye of Horus isn't about entertainment, it's about alignment. When you're still, receptive, and breathing deeply, symbols arrive naturally, like ripples spreading across still water. And once seen, they change you, because you can't unremember truth. Doesn't that explain why people return from these states transformed? But symbols don't just bring comfort, they also bring challenge. Some visions appear as demons, shadows, or terrifying forms. Are they real? Or are they mirrors of the parts of yourself you've avoided? To understand why fear rises in these states, we need to explore the hidden trial every seeker eventually faces. Many people describe bad trips with cannabis as if they were cursed, visions of demons, suffocating panic, or endless spirals of dread. But Hermetic wisdom reframes this entirely. What you meet in those moments isn't punishment, it's training. The so-called demon is nothing more than the shadow of yourself rising to be seen. Doesn't that shift fear from enemy to teacher? The ego hates mirrors, and cannabis amplifies them. That's why some feel hunted by shadows or haunted by faces in the dark. What they're really meeting are unprocessed emotions, wounds, and repressions that daily life hides under noise. The plant clears that noise, and suddenly the closet door swings open. Isn't it obvious that the monster outside is often the one you've locked inside? Think of Tibetan Bardo teachings. After death, souls face deities that can appear terrifying or blissful, depending on recognition. The fearful visions are not external, they're projections of your own unintegrated mind. Cannabis, used ritually, offers a rehearsal for that trial. Facing your inner shadows now means less terror later. Isn't it remarkable how the plant doubles as preparation for the ultimate journey? I once heard a seeker say they saw a horned figure laughing at them during meditation with cannabis. At first, they panicked. But when they breathed, looked closer, and refused to run, the figure dissolved into light, revealed as their own fear of rejection. The demon wasn't real, it was repressed memory taking form. How many of our darkest fears might transform the same way if faced directly? That's the hidden power. Fear isn't a sign of failure, but initiation. Shadows arise so they can be integrated, transmuted into wisdom. Just as alchemists turned lead into gold, seekers turn fear into freedom. Instead of running, they breathe, stay still, and let the shadow reveal its lesson. Isn't that what true courage really means, transforming darkness into clarity? And here's the fascinating part, shadows don't just respond to silence, they respond to vibration. The Egyptians used tones, chants, and resonance to guide seekers safely through fear. Could it be that sound itself is the navigation tool that turns a chaotic trip into sacred revelation? Every ancient culture understood that sound is not decoration, it's navigation. Under the influence of cannabis, vibration becomes a compass, shaping where the mind travels. Egyptian priests filled their temples with tones that echoed like eternity itself, guiding seekers through inner worlds. When rhythm and breath merged, visions settled into harmony. Doesn't that explain why silence sometimes feels incomplete without sound? Modern science calls this brainwave entrainment, how rhythm pulls the mind into alpha or theta states. Chants, drumming, even humming act like keys unlocking the nervous system. With cannabis amplifying sensitivity, the effect becomes unmistakable. Sound turns into a living code. It's like music isn't just heard, it's entered. Have you ever noticed how one song can completely shift your mood in seconds? Imagine this: you light a candle, inhale gently, and play a deep, steady tone. Within minutes, your heartbeat begins to follow the rhythm, your breath synchronizes, and the mind starts opening like a lotus. The plant responds to sound as if it were an ancient companion, dancing to frequencies long forgotten. Doesn't that suggest vibration is the language both body and plant understand? Egyptian initiates used repetitive chanting not to entertain but to stabilize. Without resonance, the seeker could drift into chaos. With it, the path became clear. The plant magnified sound until it wasn't just vibration in the air, it was vibration in the bones. That's why sound was sacred, not accessory. Could it be that music today still carries the same dormant power, waiting to be remembered? I remember attending a simple drum circle where one person had consumed cannabis in a ceremonial way. They later said the drumbeat felt like a rope pulling them upward, past fear, into a state of awe. No visions of chaos, just steady climbing through rhythm. Doesn't that prove sound can be the bridge when the path feels unstable? And here lies the crucial lesson: neither plant nor sound nor breath work in isolation. They only reveal their depth when joined by one element that every tradition agreed upon: intention. Without it, even sacred tools become noise. So how did the ancients prepare themselves to ensure clarity instead of confusion? The ancients knew something we often forget: the plant itself is neutral, but the way you approach it changes everything. Without intention, cannabis becomes fog, confusing, distracting, even overwhelming. But with reverence, it sharpens like crystal, turning every breath into clarity. Isn't it striking that the same leaf can be either a trap or a teacher depending on how you hold it? Preparation was never superstition. Fasting, cleansing, prayer, even bathing before ritual were all ways of shaping the vessel. Think of it like tuning an instrument before a performance. The music can only sound right if the strings are ready. The human body was treated the same way, prepared as a container for vision. Could it be that our modern neglect of preparation is why so many miss the depth? Take this as a practice: before making any decision, sacred or simple, pause for 10 seconds, breathe, and silently ask, "What's my intention here?" Even in daily life, intention reframes everything. Eating becomes nourishment, walking becomes meditation, conversation becomes connection. Doesn't this show that intention itself is the technology of consciousness? When cannabis was used in temples, people didn't walk in casually. They fasted, they prayed, they created sacred space, because they knew the container defined the vision. Without that container, the plant could scatter awareness. With it, the same plant aligned perception like a lens focusing sunlight. Isn't that the difference between foggy smoke and guiding fire? This is why intention is the true key. It's not about escaping reality, it's about remembering. Every tradition agreed, what you bring inward is what rises outward. Cannabis didn't create visions, it revealed them, like polishing the mirror of the soul. And if that's true, then what happens when a society intentionally buries that knowledge? Because here's the truth: cannabis wasn't banned because it was weak, it was hidden because it was powerful. Governments and systems of control feared what it revealed. Want to see why knowledge of this plant sparked a hidden war that still shapes the way we see it today? Cannabis wasn't outlawed because it made people lazy, it was outlawed because it made them aware. When governments realized the plant expanded perception and dissolved illusions, they recognized a threat to control. A person who sees through the veil is harder to manipulate. Doesn't that reframe prohibition as less about health and more about power? During the Cold War, hidden projects tested the plant's effects on remote viewing and altered states. Some experiments revealed astonishing results, people describing distant locations, tapping into layers of awareness science couldn't explain. Instead of sharing those findings, they buried them. If cannabis could unlock perception beyond the five senses, who would want that truth widely known? Look at history and notice the pattern. Every tool that frees the mind is eventually demonized. Books were burned, rituals outlawed, languages suppressed. Cannabis joined that long list, cast into the shadows not because it failed, but because it worked. Isn't it ironic how society often attacks what it fears most? Even in modern times, industries that thrive on distraction and dependency quietly benefit from the plant's suppression. After all, a seeker who finds peace within needs fewer products, fewer pills, fewer escapes. The green messenger became dangerous not to people, but to systems that profit from their blindness. Doesn't that suggest the real war on drugs was always a war on awakening? Yet Thoth's warning echoes: knowledge can be hidden, but never destroyed. Truth survives in whispers, symbols, and memories waiting to be reawakened. And as prohibition begins to crumble, the sacred use of cannabis is resurfacing, not as rebellion, but as remembrance. Could it be that we are entering the very moment the ancients foresaw? Because what's emerging isn't just about the plant, it's about the seeker. Cannabis as a messenger, a symbol, a bridge between sky and earth. When used with breath, intention, and sound, it becomes more than green smoke, it becomes ritual. Want to see how the ancients framed it as Thoth's own gift, a living code that only the ready could unlock? More than a plant, cannabis was always treated as a correspondence, a thread between sky and earth, body and spirit, human and divine. Thoth himself called it a messenger, a green key that unlocked memory. When approached with reverence, it became a mirror of the soul. When treated carelessly, it became only smoke. Isn't it striking how one symbol can carry both prison and freedom depending on the seeker? In the ancient temples, cannabis wasn't casual, it was woven into living ritual. Paired with breath, intention, and sound, it wasn't just consumed, it was activated. Smoke curled upward like a prayer, chants vibrated through stone, and seekers felt themselves lifted into alignment. The plant wasn't the power itself, it was the bridge. Could that be why its secret was only given to those who were ready? Even today, when people use cannabis in silence and presence, they often describe the same archetypal visions: spirals of light, mirrors revealing forgotten truths, or fires that burn away illusion. These aren't hallucinations, they're recognitions. The plant seems to act as a reminder, saying, "You already carry this within." Doesn't that suggest it's less about the plant, and more about the memory it stirs? Think of it like a tuning fork. On its own, it makes a sound, but its real power is in making everything around it vibrate in harmony. Cannabis acts the same way. It awakens what's dormant, but only if you're willing to listen. This is why preparation mattered so much. Without harmony, the fork rattles. With it, the whole temple resonates. Isn't that the true meaning of correspondence? The green messenger isn't about escape, it's about return. Return to the breath, return to intention, return to memory. It's not for everyone, because not everyone is ready to carry the weight of remembrance. But for those who are, the plant becomes less of a substance and more of a symbol, a key hidden in plain sight. Doesn't that make you wonder what else in nature hides in silence, waiting to be remembered? And that brings us here. The plant is not the destination, but a doorway. The real journey is the awakening of the seeker, the one who chooses to honor the message instead of chasing the smoke. Which means our next step is clear: how do we bring this ancient remembrance back into a world that once tried to bury it? So what does this all mean for you? It means cannabis was never just smoke, it was a mirror, a bridge, a messenger. When you treat it with intention, breath, and sound, it stops being escape and starts being remembrance. And that's the choice in front of you right now. Will you let it be fog, or will you let it become fire? If even one part of this resonated, don't just think about it, practice it. Take 10 seconds after this video, breathe consciously, and ask yourself, what's my true intention? That small act alone can shift everything. And if you felt the spark, make sure you subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this with someone who's ready to remember too. Here's my question for you, memory. Have you ever felt a moment of clarity, with or without cannabis, where reality seemed to open like a hidden doorway? Drop a single word in the comments. That one word might become someone else's signpost. The ancients whispered that truth can be buried, but never destroyed. And now that you've heard the message, it's your turn to carry it forward, into your breath, your choices, your life. Save this for later, and let's continue unfolding these mysteries together. And if you're ready to go deeper, don't stop here. The next video on your screen holds the thread we've only just begun to follow. Click it, and step further into the journey. Because remembrance doesn't end with one key, it begins there.